The day the earth broke beneath Toria was supposed to be one of celebration. Twin moons bathed the capital city of Eltherin in golden light as the Tellurian people prepared for the equinox festival. From the domed spires of the knowledge sanctums to the lush, bioluminescent gardens spiraling up the cliffs, the world hummed with music and peaceful activity. For the Tellurians, tall, graceful beings with crystalline eyes and skin that shimmered faintly under starlight, it was a time of reflection and unity. Serena Vell, a senior linguist of the archive keepers, had spent that morning deep inside the Grand Library, beneath the Foundation Hall, a massive underground chamber that held the last surviving relics of the old empire. The air down there was always still, perfumed with the soft scent of illuminated parchment and crystal root incense. She had been carefully translating the prayer of voices etched on a star slate, an artifact so ancient it predated the written records of her own civilization. Her fingers moved delicately over the glowing script as her mind drifted through thoughts of the past, of the dead who had once sung these words into stone. Then the ground spoke back. It began as a low moan, an unnatural vibration that swept through the shelves like a beast shifting in its sleep. A moment later, the entire chamber shuddered. Walls rippled, ancient bindings snapped, the carved floor cracked with a thunderous groan as the quake struck with full force. Dust rained from the high ceiling, chandeliers of glowing vines snapped and fell. The foundation, untouched for centuries, was being ripped apart. Serena cried out and scrambled toward the central pillar, but she was too slow. The upper tier of the hall collapsed in a deafening roar. She saw a blur of motion, a wall of rock and steel cascading downward, before something struck her back and drove her to the ground. The world went black. When she opened her eyes again, there was no light, only a faint violet haze from her suit's failing wrist torch. She was on her side, half-pinned beneath a slab of stone that had once been the ceiling. Pain throbbed through her spine and leg. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She could feel the weight of the rock crushing the lower half of her body, and yet she was alive. For 3 days she lay there in that broken tomb. She survived by sipping from the emergency water capsules in her belt. She listened to the distant echoes of collapses far above and the shifting moans of stone that threatened to fall again. Once, she screamed for help, her voice hoarse and small, but only silence answered. Her skin dimmed. Her energy faded. Still, she clung to consciousness. In her delirium, she began whispering the lines she had been translating, the prayer of voices, over and over like a chant. We are not stone. We are not silence. We are stars who remember. The words gave her focus. They tethered her to something older than pain. But she knew her strength was failing. Her vision dimmed. Her voice cracked to a whisper. And just as she felt herself slipping into the black once more, her wrist torch blinked in rapid succession. It was a signal, not from her suit, but from above. Something had found her. In the orbital silence above Toria, the Vanguard Ember floated like a steel guardian, a human vessel unlike any other. It was part warship, part sanctuary, carved from the remains of Earth's last Titan-class cruiser and reborn in the dark of intergalactic exile. Within its reinforced hull moved a singular man whose name was whispered across colonies and ruins alike with both reverence and awe. Marcus Valor. He was not born a superhero. He had earned the title through fire, war, and the kind of choices that leave permanent scars. After the Shardfront incident, after the collapse of Calrose Station, and after the fall of the Crystal Hold, he had become something more than soldier, something heavier, the last of the human sentinels, the one who arrived when no one else could. And now, from deep within the Ember's navigation suite, Marcus stared at the growing feed of seismic readings from Telluria's surface. A planetary quake of unexpected magnitude had cracked open the northern hemisphere. Civilian distress calls filled the frequencies. But amidst the noise, one signal stood out, thin, buried under rubble, but alive. He narrowed his eyes. Echo pattern? He asked, voice low. Lone life form, replied the ship's AI, a clipped voice named Vix. 73 meters beneath the surface of grid sector Lear 8. No comms access. No movement for 70 hours, but biosigns remain active, likely trapped. Marcus exhaled, his breath steady as iron. Prep the exoframe, he ordered. Risk factor is high, terrain unstable, rescue probability, I'm not asking. Vix went silent. Then understood, Commander. Within minutes, Marcus descended into Teloria's atmosphere. The exoframe wrapped around his body like a second skin, powered by a microreactor, enhanced by gravity nullification tech, reinforced by the strongest alloys humanity could conjure. It was more than a suit. It was the reason planets still had hope when all else had failed. He landed in a broken plaza that once led to the steps of the Grand Library. Now it was a wasteland, cracked stone, shattered towers, ash hanging like fog. No survivors in sight, only silence and ruin. But the beacon pulsed. Stepping through the devastation, Marcus found the breach, what remained of the foundation hall buried beneath tons of stone. Scans guided his hands as he began clearing debris, piece by piece. The rock groaned beneath his strength. The rubble shifted. There, beneath a jagged overhang, his sensors locked onto her. He knelt and brushed away the dust, and saw her, pale, unconscious, but alive. Hair matted with dust, her skin dim and cold, but her wrist light flickered weakly, trying still to send a signal. He reached down and pressed his gloved hand against the stone that pinned her. It was the size of a shuttle. A boulder that had crushed structures, defied machines. But not him. Not now. Marcus planted both feet, and with a cry that echoed through the ruins, he began to lift. Steel shrieked. Stone cracked. His suit screamed warnings he ignored. Muscles trembled. The ground shook again, threatening collapse, but he didn't stop. He didn't break. And when the stone finally rose, just high enough to drag her body free, he did it not with superpowers, but with something rarer. Choice. She gasped as the light touched her face, and for the first time in days, Serena Vell opened her eyes and saw a human standing against the weight of a world, holding back death with his bare hands. Serena coughed once, then again, the taste of dust and blood thick on her tongue. Her eyes fluttered open, aching against the sudden influx of light after days of suffocating darkness. For a moment, her vision shimmered with fragments of memory and blurred outlines, stones falling, voices fading, pain blossoming in her chest, and then, slowly, the shadow above her sharpened into form. She saw a man, a giant of metal and muscle, wrapped in an exo-frame that still hummed with residual power. Behind him, the remains of the fallen library were cast in crimson hues from the fires that still flickered in the city ruins. His breath steamed faintly in the cold air. His visor retracted, revealing a face drawn with exhaustion, dust clinging to the sweat lining his brow. And his eyes were human, unmistakably so. Deep brown, intense, and focused entirely on her. "You're alive," he said, voice low and gritty, with the certainty of someone who had seen too many die. She blinked. "How long?" "Too long," he answered. 79 hours. You were buried under half a mountain." He knelt beside her as his gauntlet opened, revealing a medic's injector. Before she could protest, he pressed it gently against her shoulder. A numbing warmth spread through her veins as the pain began to soften, though her body still trembled. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice cracked and raw. "Marcus Valor. Human. Rescue specialist. Let's just say I drop in where nobody else dares." She tried to laugh, but the sound came out as a strangled cough. He gave her a hydration capsule, which she drank greedily. "You were tracking my signal?" she asked. He nodded. "Your beacon was nearly lost under the aftershocks, but it kept pulsing. I heard it." A small silence fell between them. Not awkward, but profound. She studied his face, sensing something beneath the armor and rough exterior. Not arrogance, not recklessness. Something quieter. Guilt? Or was it burden? He looked away first. "We can't stay long," Marcus said, standing and scanning the horizon. "The structural integrity of this place is shot. More tremors could hit at any moment." Serena tried to sit, gasping as pain flared in her side. He was at her side instantly, supporting her with a steady arm. "My leg," she muttered, grimacing. "It's broken." "I figured." He lifted her as carefully as possible. "I've got a ship 2 clicks out, but we'll need to move through the breach. The tunnels are unstable. I can't fly in. They'll collapse." "You're going to carry me 2 kilometers on foot through collapsing tunnels?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. His grin was subtle, almost self-deprecating. "Carried worse. You're lighter than a Terran engine core." Despite the pain, she smirked. "That's not a compliment where I'm from." They began their slow trek out of the ruins. Marcus taking careful steps as he carried her cradled in his arms. The world around them groaned, stones shifting under pressure, distant structures falling like bones snapping in the dark. The air grew hotter as gas fires ignited along shattered veins of energy conduits, casting dancing shadows along the broken corridors. And through it all, Serena stared up at him, her head resting against his chest. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. "Why would you come for someone you've never met?" Marcus didn't answer right away. "Because I've been the one buried," he finally said, "and no one came." The silence that followed said more than words ever could. The underground tunnels of Eltherin were designed centuries ago, forged by Tellurian architects who believed in beauty even beneath the earth. Arched walkways lined with reflective crystal veins, murals etched into stone walls telling stories of explorers and dreamers. Now, those same corridors were filled with ash and fractured pillars. The murals split and blackened. The world had shifted, and with it, the weight of history itself had been thrown from its foundation. Marcus navigated carefully, scanning each corridor for structural weaknesses. The suit's sensors whispered warnings constantly. Heat surges, pressure changes, radiation levels spiking. The path was a corridor of death, but he pushed forward without hesitation, carrying Serena as though she were the most precious thing in the galaxy. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, Serena watched him from within his arms, studying the strange man who had appeared from the sky like a myth. His face bore marks of battles, scarred, hardened, lived in. But his eyes were not cold. They carried the kind of warmth that had been tested and reshaped in fire. "Why are you really here?" she asked as the corridor narrowed. "I was deployed to monitor seismic threats," Marcus replied. "But I never just watch. I interfere. Gets me in trouble a lot." She smiled faintly. "You're too powerful for the council to leash, aren't you?" They tried. Didn't stick. A low rumble shook the floor beneath them. Stone cracked above. Marcus picked up speed, bracing her against his chest and ducking through the failing archway just as the ceiling behind them gave way. Dust and rock thundered down. The glow from his shoulder light bounced wildly along the walls. Serena winced as her leg jarred again. "We're going to get crushed at this rate." "Not on my watch." Marcus growled, "Hold on." They entered a wider hall, a core transit artery that once carried energy through the entire lower city. Now molten rock bled from the cracks, and a chasm had split the floor. On the other side, daylight. A fracture in the surface above, sunlight spilling through it like a god's eye, illuminating the final stretch to the surface. Marcus knelt. With one hand still holding her close, he reached down and activated his magnetic boots. His HUD lit with calculations, trajectories, power constraints. Then he spoke, more to himself than to her. "One shot." Before she could ask what he meant, he surged forward. The boots pulsed with magnetic thrust, and with a roar, he launched across the chasm. Heat singed their sides, molten shards dancing past. For a moment they flew, and then they landed hard on the other side, Marcus absorbing the impact with a grunt, rolling to protect her body from the fall. Dust filled the air. But when it cleared, they were safe. She coughed, eyes wide. "You're insane." "Most heroes are," he replied, brushing debris off her shoulder. As he lifted her once more, the light from above shimmered down across her face. The open sky beckoned. Behind them, the tunnels continued to collapse. But ahead, escape waited. Marcus climbed steadily, every motion deliberate, as Serena lay in his arms and watched the sunlight return. And somewhere in her chest, beneath the bruises and broken bones, a quiet wonder began to bloom. Not because she had been saved, but because she had never expected that a human, flesh and blood, steel and will, could feel like something more than legend. He felt like a promise. The last wall gave way with a groan and a spray of falling stone. Light spilled in, warm and golden, touching Serena's face like a blessing from a god she no longer believed in. Marcus stepped through the broken threshold into the daylight, carrying her like something sacred, his armor gleaming faintly beneath the layers of dust and ash. They emerged into the open, onto the crumbled terrace of the Grand Library's upper courtyard, now a shattered plateau clinging to the edge of a cliff that had not existed 3 days before. What once had been the beating heart of Telluria's intellectual legacy was now a scar on the landscape, smoking, gutted, and ruined. The ancient white towers had collapsed into tangled spires of marble and alloy. Trees that had once sung with crystal chimes were now blackened, their branches curled in silence. There were no people here, no birds, just wind and ruin. Serena stirred weakly in Marcus's arms, her face lit not just by the sun, but by disbelief. "I didn't think I'd ever see the sky again," she whispered. Marcus set her down gently against a slanted stone wall and dropped to one knee beside her. "You nearly didn't." She turned her head to look at him. "Then why did you come?" He looked past her, eyes scanning the horizon, as if he were trying to measure the weight of that question. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, lower, almost reluctant. "I've pulled too many out too late," he said. "I've found too many beneath wreckage, thinking I was fast enough, only to see the light already gone from their eyes." Serena didn't speak. She watched him with an intensity that surprised them both. She hadn't known him more than a few hours, but already she could sense the fractures beneath the armor. Not the mechanical plates, the ones in his soul. "I made a choice," he said. "I told myself if I ever heard a cry early enough, if I could feel a heartbeat in the rubble, I'd move the stars to get there in time." Her fingers brushed the edge of her own wrist, where the emergency beacon still blinked weakly. "Then I'm grateful my signal found the one man who still listens." He looked back at her, caught in her gaze, and for a moment, the silence between them was no longer empty. Overhead, the low thrum of an approaching aircraft broke the stillness. A long-winged hovercraft crested the far ridge and dipped toward them, its dark silhouette cutting across the sun. Marcus rose to his feet and activated a beacon on his wrist. Within seconds, the ship adjusted course. "Evac is here," he said. "This one's human tech, but you'll be safe. They've got med bays, atmospheric stabilizers, trauma pods, everything you need to start healing." "And you?" she asked. "I'll be on it, for now." "For now." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not staying in orbit forever. There are others down there." This quake hit across 3 provinces. Toria wasn't the only wound. She nodded slowly, a strange pang fluttering in her chest. "Of course." The ship touched down with a hiss of pressure vents and the grinding clank of landing struts. 2 medics emerged, dressed in dark green, moving fast but respectfully. Marcus leaned over Serena one last time before they reached her. "Whatever happens next," he said, "you made it. You stayed alive. That matters." She touched his hand, "And you lifted a mountain to make sure I did." They held each other's gaze as the medics eased her onto a floating stretcher. As the hovercraft's hatch sealed and the engines hummed to life, Serena kept her eyes on Marcus, framed by ash and sunlight, and in her mind she began to rewrite the stories of heroes. Because now, she had met one. The interior of the medship was clean, quiet, and humming with soft diagnostics. Serena lay in a biostabilization bed, her fractured leg encased in a gel cast that pulsed with warm regenerative light. Her body still ached, but it no longer felt like it was slipping toward death. She had eaten, drank, slept, but she had not stopped thinking about him. Marcus Valor. She had heard stories of human heroes. The Tellurians had long been wary of the Terran species, calling them reckless, wild, driven by ambition rather than harmony. But there were always stories of outliers, men and women who stood between fire and failure. Myths woven from broken planets and impossible rescues. She had never believed them. Until one of them had reached through stone and time and pulled her out. The door to her chamber slid open without sound, and Marcus stepped inside. He had shed most of his armor now, dressed in a simple black flight shirt and utility pants, but his presence still filled the room. His strength wasn't just in his size or skill, it was in his calm, in the way he moved, as if gravity deferred to him out of respect. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said. "I wasn't asleep," she replied. "You made it back." "I said I would." There was a quiet between them then, not from lack of words, but the weight of things they weren't yet ready to say. He walked over to the control console and checked her vitals. "Bones are healing well," he noted. "You'll be walking again in 2 weeks, maybe sooner if you keep your nutrient intake up." "You read my file?" He gave a half smile. "I read everything. Comes with the job." She folded her hands over her chest. "And what's your next job?" "I go where I'm needed," he said. "Sometimes that's a burning moon. Sometimes it's a broken ship. This time it was a library buried beneath a quake." She looked at him for a long moment. "You know what that place was to us?" "I do now." She reached beside the bed and picked up a shard of broken crystal from the library. It had been found in her robes, miraculously intact. A piece of history. I was down there to protect this, she said. Not just a stone, a record of who we were before we forgot how to listen. Marcus looked at the shard with new reverence. You reminded me, she said quietly. That some still do. He met her gaze. And you reminded me why I do it. Not for medals, not for orders, for moments like that where someone lives and history isn't lost. She extended the crystal toward him. Then take this, she said. Keep it, so when the sky calls again, you carry us with you. He hesitated, then accepted the shard with care, just like accepting a torch. I will. As he turned to leave, she called his name. Marcus. He paused. If you ever return, she said, her voice steady, don't come as a hero. Come as a friend. He gave her one final look, one that said more than promise, more than farewell. Then he was gone, vanishing down the corridor of the ship, the crystal shard pulsing faintly in his hand. And Serena, though wrapped in healing wires and medicine, finally felt something deep inside her settle. She had been buried. She had been broken. But now she had been lifted. And in his shadow, she had found her place again beneath the stars. Night had fallen again over Toria, though the sky above the fractured capital no longer gleamed with its usual grace. The twin moons were veiled behind clouds of ash, and the stars were dimmed by the smoke that still rose from the broken heart of Eltherin. Yet below, in the charred skeleton of what had once been the Grand Library's eastern wing, a flicker of light danced quietly, a portable lantern, resting beside the knee of a man returned to the ruin he had pulled someone from not long before. Marcus stood amidst the silence, alone. The exo-frame was gone. He wore only his reinforced suit now, utility gloves, and a respirator clipped to his chest. His hands were dirty with ash and soil, as he carefully lifted shattered fragments of stone and crystal from the wreckage. He wasn't here for another rescue. There were no more life signs below. He had scanned 3 times, but someone had to come back for the dead. He knelt beside a half-buried relic, another of the etched star slates Serena had once studied. This one cracked, but not beyond repair. He brushed it off gently, as if afraid to wake the spirits that lingered beneath it. The world around him was quiet, in a way only truly broken places could be. There were no insects here, no wind, only the occasional crackle of distant fire and the soft, rhythmic beep of his scanner. He glanced up at the collapsed dome above. He remembered the moment he had first laid eyes on her, Serena, half buried beneath that ceiling, pale and still but not lifeless. The memory played in his mind unbidden, not as a flash of victory, but as a reminder of how close she had come to death, of how thin the line was between loss and survival. The stone he now held in his hand bore the same inscription she had been translating, the ancient prayer of the Vayari. We are not stone, we are not silence, we are stars who remember. He didn't know their language, but he had committed the words to memory. They lived inside him now. As he stood and slid the crystal into a padded case, he heard a voice behind him. I didn't think you'd return here alone. He turned. Serena stood a few meters away, wrapped in a long travel cloak. Her limp was gone, though her steps were cautious. A thin scar curved beneath her jaw, nearly invisible in the moonlight. Marcus blinked, more surprised by her presence than he would ever admit. You're supposed to be resting, he said. I've rested long enough, she replied. I had to come back. I had to see it with my own eyes, all of it. He said nothing, simply nodded. She stepped up beside him and looked over the ruins. The crumbling walls, the shattered symbols, the trees that no longer sang. It's worse than I imagined, she whispered. I'm sorry, he said. It was all he could offer. But she turned to him with a faint, strange smile. Don't be. You gave me back what matters. Not this, she gestured to the ruins, but the will to return, to try. They stood in silence for a long time, side by side, surrounded by the ashes of a world. And somewhere between them, beneath the loss, something small and powerful bloomed. Not sorrow, but resolve. The shuttle lifted them out of the ruins before dawn. Aboard the Vanguard Ember, the crew ran quietly efficient routines, well aware that their commander had returned with something weightier than just another evac report. Marcus and Serena sat alone in the observation deck as the ship slipped into high orbit. Through the viewport, Toria rolled beneath them like a scarred jewel, its surface torn by tectonic wounds that hadn't yet closed. Distant fires dotted the horizon like fading stars. Neither of them spoke at first. Then Serena turned to him. I want to ask something. And I need you to be honest. Marcus didn't flinch. Go ahead. You've saved cities, toppled warlords, flown into black holes to pull out dying crews. But when you came for me, why did it feel like it was personal? He looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. Because it was, he said finally. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. She leaned back too, eyes on the stars, her voice softened. And now what? Now, he exhaled. Now we rebuild. You, your archives, this whole damn planet if we have to, piece by piece. Serena gave a quiet, breathless laugh. That's a bold vow. I don't make small promises, Marcus replied. She looked at him again. And this time, the weight in her eyes wasn't from grief. It was from belief. Moments later, the AI's voice echoed through the chamber. Commander Valor, incoming request from Terran Command. They want your report. He tapped his wrist, muting the channel. They can wait. The viewport flickered as a new scan came online. Beneath Teloria's surface, the AI had detected an untouched subvault buried deep in the old city's foundations. Unexplored, undisturbed, still intact. Marcus glanced at Serena. She nodded once, her voice steady. Then we go back, he smiled. Together. And the stars, ancient and infinite, blinked silently as the ship began to descend once more. This time not for rescue, but for something rarer. Restoration. The shuttle descended like a whisper through the ash-choked skies of Toria, its engines tuned for silence, its hull veiled against the residual storms that still haunted the atmosphere. Far below, the fractured terrain glowed faintly with the pulse of geothermal veins that the land still bleeding from the wound it had suffered. But through that chaos, Serena could feel it, something deeper calling. Not a voice, but a memory. Marcus piloted the craft himself, hands steady on the controls. His eyes never left the horizon, but he could feel her gaze on him. You're sure it's there? He asked, not looking. She nodded, her voice calm and certain. It's there, buried beneath the eastern foundations. That vault was sealed 3 generations before the collapse. No one has seen its contents in over 1,000 years. He glanced at her. Let's make history then. They touched down in the heart of a scorched crater, surrounded by the skeletal remains of ancient towers and broken spires. The once grand Hall of Echoes had been reduced to a mound of fractured marble and twisted beams, but beneath its ruins, something still endured. Marcus activated a ground-penetrating pulse. A soft beep responded, confirming the coordinates. They suited up again, Marcus in a reinforced exo-harness, Serena in a pressure suit laced with kinetic dampeners. She walked beside him with more strength than before. Her limp had faded, her fear had vanished. Together they entered the earth once more. The path to the vault was narrow, carved into bedrock and obscured by centuries of fallen debris. Marcus cleared the passage with practiced precision, each movement efficient and deliberate. Serena followed close behind, her fingers brushing the etched stone walls that had not seen light since before her ancestors were born. At the end of the corridor, a door stood upright against time, a slab of obsidian, unmarked, unbroken. Serena stepped forward, raising her hand to its surface. She began to hum, not a melody, but a pattern, the ancient key of her people's harmonic language. The door responded instantly, vibrating with resonance, its inner mechanism stirring. Marcus watched as the black stone shimmered and parted, revealing a dark chamber filled with crystalline pillars and floating glyphs suspended in the air like fireflies trapped in stasis. The Vault of Memory. Serena stepped inside first, breath caught in her throat. The room was untouched. Scrolls, star slates, memory threads, thousands of years of Telorian thought and philosophy preserved by isolation. She turned slowly in awe, and then her gaze fell upon the central pedestal. A glowing sphere hovered there, radiating light and sorrow. She approached it, reaching out with trembling fingers. The moment she touched it, the vault stirred. Light poured from the glyphs. The room whispered 1,000 voices in harmony. The Telorians had not died with the quake. They had endured here, waiting to be found. She turned to Marcus, and there were tears in her eyes. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You saved all of us." He walked to her side, watching the lights with wonder. "Then let's make sure the galaxy knows it." And together, they began to unseal the past. 2 weeks later, the stars above Toria glowed brighter than they had in a century. From orbit, the surface still bore scars, but below those wounds, something powerful had begun to rise. A signal now pulsed from the vault, broadcasting across frequencies ancient and new. Not a call for help, but a message of return. The Tellurian culture, once thought broken, was alive, its memory restored, its voice lifted. Marcus stood once more in the observation deck of the Vanguard Ember, this time not as a lone sentinel, but as a bridge between worlds. Reports had begun to come in, archivists from surrounding systems, emissaries from neutral worlds, scholars desperate to learn. The galaxy was listening again, and Serena stood at the center of it. She wore ceremonial robes now, a fusion of Tellurian tradition and Terran design. Her words carried weight among the survivors who gathered at the base of the mountain, slowly rebuilding the ruined city not as it once was, but as it could become. On the day of the vault's first public opening, she walked with Marcus up the new marble steps. The wind stirred the banners above them. A crowd of survivors watched in reverent silence. Behind her, Toria breathed again. She stopped beside him at the summit. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He glanced down at the valley below. "Not for a second. Even though you never meant to stay?" "I didn't," he said. "But sometimes, a place finds you. Not the other way around." She smiled. "Then maybe you're not just a rescuer. Maybe you're part of this now." He looked at her, not answering, and in his silence, she found her answer. The vault doors opened behind them, and light poured out. Not fire, not artificial glare, but living memory. A wave of golden radiance, gentle and endless, illuminating the faces of all who gathered. Marcus stepped back as Serena took the podium, her voice ready to tell the world not only what had survived, but what was now beginning. He watched her speak. Watched a people reclaim their place in the stars. And for the first time in a long, long while, he felt like he belonged. Not because he had lifted a stone, but because, when all else had fallen, he had lifted a soul. And in doing so, he had helped rebuild a future.